Jimmy, we don't know how the president's going to react. Clearly, he made his position clear ahead of this, saying the Fed should not raise interest rates. Does this raise a risk, now that the Fed did raise interest rates, for the president to do something more drastic than just complain on Twitter?
Well, listen, I think there'll be a lot of complaining on Twitter. I would expect. So listen, we had the hike today. We might get a couple more. We have a slowing economy. I would expect that 2019 is going to be a year where the president is going to open up with both barrels or both smartphones on the Federal Reserve. But right, so who cares? That's just tweets. Well, it matters if it begins to change how Congress treats the Fed. As you recall, back around 2010, there was the whole sort of audit the Fed movement. We haven't heard a lot about that. That can change, where Republicans could key off what the president says and begin to talk about bringing the Fed chairman for more hearings. Maybe they need to be audited by the GAO. There's even more sort of extreme ideas out there about what to do about the Fed. The Fed can still be altered by Congress, and it would not surprise me, just as you've seen Republicans shift on trade, if you begin to see them talking a lot more about Fed independence and whether the Fed is too independent and ignoring other things like economic growth.
Jared, is there any aspect of the president's criticism over the last year or two of the Fed that you can understand, that you think is fair?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, let me acknowledge Jimmy's bold forecast that there's going to be a lot of complaining on Twitter. I think that is
Take it to the bank.
That is wholly accurate. And in fact, I'm surprised the president's thumbs have been inactive this afternoon. It's almost like he has something else to do. I think that, interestingly, I yield to no one in terms of my valuing of the Fed independence. I agree exactly with what Jerome Powell just said. But I really don't think it makes sense for politicians who represent constituents whose economic lives are affected by Federal Reserve actions in a big, important way to have the Fed be, off base, off limits. So I don't mind that kind of jawboning. I don't agree with it. I think Donald Trump gets a lot more wrong than he gets right. But that tweet you just put up where he complained about the strong dollar hurting the trade balance, where he mentioned that inflation has been tame and quiet. Interestingly, as somebody wrote, it was John Cassidy wrote the other day, you got Donald Trump and Paul Krugman agreeing on the Fed, what the Fed ought to do on rates. That's kind of unusual. So yeah, it's not like he's saying things that are patently wrong.
Jared, you are underestimating the potential for crazy ideas to emerge. Not just like, well, yes, we should be able to question the Fed chair, but maybe we should put limits on the Fed. Maybe we said Congress should determine that the Fed can only raise interest rates if unemployment is under 4%. That's an idea that's out there. It happens to be a Bernie Sanders idea, but there can be other ideas. I very much worry the momentum if we start questioning the Fed because for political purposes, which is what this would be.
I
agree, Jimmy, but you're not saying that the Federal Reserve should have paused on interest rates to avoid all that today, are you? Because then there would have been questions about credibility and independence as well. So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't for Powell.
Well, I actually thought I thought Powell squared that circle pretty nicely. I agree with maybe a sentiment we haven't heard that much today, which is that I view this as a pretty dovish hike, one more dovish certainly than the markets took. The Fed is not going to go from 3 baked-in hikes to 1 or 0 baked-in hikes. To go from 3 to 2 was a fairly big deal. If you look at their forecast on unemployment, there's no way the Fed is going to tell you they're not going to hike rates when their forecast is for unemployment to be almost a point below their natural rate next year. So I actually think they threaded that
Bernstein would be
needed
cutting. Come on. Fed Chair Bernstein would be cutting.
Jimmy, I want to ask something you said at the top. What likelihood do you put on the Republicans actually moving towards trying to fundamentally alter the independence of the Fed?
I think there'll be serious discussions, and I think you'll hear a lot of conversation. I don't know if Democrats are going to go along with that. It's tough to get anything done in Congress. But I think the mere fact that if we start seeing that again, as we did with the audit the Fed movement, I think if I'm an investor, I begin to think very, very hard about not just current Fed independence, but where the Fed might be 5 years down the road. We've seen all these other institutions in the United States sort of under attack in recent years. Why would the Fed be left?
I think it's a scary prospect, and I think we need to hear from Mike Santoli on how the markets would interpret that.
Can I make a quick point? Here's a quick point.
Yeah, one second, Jared, because we'll come back, because I think it's important to say that the Fed is one of the most independent, credible institutions in Washington.
Let's not screw that up.
And what would happen if that were compromised?
obviously negative for the markets. I don't know exactly tangibly how the market would trade off that necessarily, if it's going to hit the dollar, if it's going to be some kind of effect like that. I do think there's a way we can look back on today and say, look, he got the one hike in after all the criticism. Anything that happens from here, he can, is not going to look necessarily like doing the president's bidding.
If they start calling him in for hearings,
that's
Jimmy
sure.
says.
That's,
so what? Look, let me explain
Final
why.
word, Jared.
Okay, so here's why I
audits?
think. Here's where I think Jimmy is probably overstating the case. The Republican House and Senate and White House were actually gunning for the Fed's independence last year, and they were unable to do much. Now we have a different structure up there with the Democratic House with a lot more progressive liberals. And I don't think if a Jeb Hensarling-led Financial Services Committee is unsuccessful
Progressives
at intervening in the
would
Senate,
love to alter the Fed, Jared.
Nah, I don't
Bernie
think
Sanders
so.
has all kinds of Elizabeth Warren.
I really think
Guys,
that
we have
I think
to-
if the
we have
Republicans
to leave
couldn't
it
do
there, I'm
it,
afraid.
you're not going to get it in this session.